happy Monday to you and to all
As
the
well to you.
listeners here on Power 102 at home and abroad. I'm Kimiko Scott, and it's my pleasure to engage in today's Power conversation, having been invited by your usual host, Mrs. Denise Deming. We're going to jumpstart our conversation this morning. We're speaking with Nigel Campbell, and I want you all to know the numbers you can contact us on are 222 TALK, that's 222-8255. In the US and Canada, toll free 866 525 1099. And on WhatsApp, you can get us on 868 138 1021. Thank you for being here. It's my pleasure to be with you on this Monday morning. We're getting off to a good start. So, Nigel Campbell, thank you for being here, for joining me.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Excellent. Well, Denise show.
Well, it's Dini's show, yeah. This is second time, but that's a whole other story.
Yes,
I'm sure tell you about that.
we're fixing it today. We're fixing it today. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
Let me introduce you. Nigel Campbell is a music businessman and a podcast host for Music Matters, the Caribbean edition. He's also a director at Production One Limited. If you find that name sounds familiar, that's because they produce the jazz artists on the Greens event, which is the largest Caribbean jazz event in Trinidad. And I wanted to jump straight into this conversation and ask you what you mean by this music businessman. How do you define that title for yourself?
Well, one of the things that happens in Trinidad is everybody's a creator, right? But they have a lot of things that happen behind the scenes. And I'm not suggesting that there aren't people behind the scenes, but it's something that I have been passionate about for many years. And I thought that it would be important to get behind the scenes to make things work. And aside from that music businessman title of producing a concert and producing a festival, I also do the podcast. So I'm trying to get into all the areas that talk about the music of Trinidad and Tobago and certainly the wider Caribbean. So it's a business I run, iRadio.tt. And we delve into the conversation about business of music, as well as I said, my quote unquote side hustle. I produce a jazz festival called Jazz Artists on the Greens.
So, and that is considered the side hustle. That's not even the main business, really.
Well, I'm just a director on Production One Limited. I was not a founder of Production One Limited, and I actually didn't come in at the very beginning. So I don't necessarily consider, although a lot of people know my face and they know my name associated with jazz, but hey, I take it as I get it.
Why is this something you're so passionate about, the creative arts and music in the Caribbean?
I probably was, when I was younger, I was one of those nerds who used to read the liner notes of records. You listen to the record, obviously, but I was always keen to understand what happens behind the scenes. Who's the recording engineer? Who are the musicians? Finding the commonalities, reading anything about musicians, biographies, and that kind of stuff. So that started when I was a teenager back in the 1970s. So, and it's continued since. And certainly by the center itself, soca was starting, Kaiso Jazz was starting. And I was very passionate about this thing that was happening in Trinidad and thinking, hey, this could possibly go somewhere. Yeah. Kaiso Jazz, more so than soca, believe it or not. Of course, soca is our big thing. But the idea of we in Trinidad and Tobago have something that the world could listen to is something that I've been really passionate about. And I followed it all the way through, as well as getting involved in understanding artists and the business of music promoters, that kind of stuff. And as I talked about one side hustle. A second side hustle I have is I write the music articles in Caribbean Beat, the in-flight magazine of Caribbean Airlines. So I do the music reviews and other feature articles associated with music there, trying to get all this knowledge that is in my head and trying to get it out so as many people could understand that there is something here more than just a jam and a wine and a chip and a jump in our music.
And when you entered into that interest, who were some of the artists that you were being exposed to in Trinidad? Because I know a lot of our listeners could probably relate to those names.
Well, certainly at the very beginning, as I said, in the 1970s, I always give this story. The first time I heard Clive Zander's record, he played a song, it was a Sparrow song called Mr. Walker. And he played in a very jazzy style, very reminiscent of a pianist, Dave Brubeck. And I read illiterate for 16 or 17-year-old self said, hey, Sparrow is a big thing. You have Dave Brubeck, this great play this music. How cool is that? We need to discover it's a Trinidadian. And I was blown away. So I said, hey, if this is what Trinidad can produce, more power. So there's Michael Boothman, Clive Zander, of course, those early pioneers, Callian, Carl Jacob, Robin Imamsha, Beaver Henderson, Nappy Mayers. All of this new music was bubbling up in Trinidad at the time. And I thought, this is the way to go. Certainly by the first half of the 80s, I was at university abroad. And of course, being in a foreign country, you're yearning for anything local, and more so so what are the little pirate radio stations you're hearing all the music? Of course, Sparrow Kitchener, and then Super Blue, Marshall, and all.
Yes.
So the idea of local music being something and having the possibility of quote unquote crossing over has always been intriguing to me. And of course, seeing the development of other genres like Rapso coming out, and more recently, Zest and Trinidad. I mean, they have some little problems. I just heard in the news that one of the artists once again is being banned to go to St. Kitts.
In one of the countries, yeah.
Yeah, but that idea of creating original music from Trinidad that has some potential of getting out into the wider world is something I've always been interested in. And it's one of those kind of things that has got me into the music. Can have me passionate about our local music.
Do you think that your experience or your time abroad also helped you influence that passion? Because I've found that there's a yearning for home that happens.
That's quite true.
And that yearning is sometimes well soothed by the music and hearing the social commentary that might be included in some of the songs.
Great question. Well, two parts of my life, as I said, in the early 80s, 80 to 84, I was in Toronto at university. And in Toronto in the 80s was not a Caribbean city. They just had, I think, one voice. Jai Oja Maharaj had a radio station on Chin FM. And another part of my life in the late 90s into the early 2000s, I lived in the United States. Yeah. And in those two periods, you recognize that the way that we distribute our music is not ideal. Right. So a lot of our music is either pirated, somebody bring it up, you hear it on it's always a connection as opposed to, and certainly in those days, we didn't have internet radio and streaming and all those kind of things. Right. So access to the music was, few and far between. So there was this insistence, this draw for me to hear more, as it was, hoping that something will cross over. And of course, part of that for me was steel pan music and pan jazz and that kind of stuff. I discovered Andy Narell was not a Trinidadian. I remember saying, oh, Bugsy Sharp, Robbie Greenidge. We're talking about a steel band, and people tell me, no, Andy Narell. And I'm saying, hold on a second. And discovering that there are other people playing music that, was born in Trinidad as it was. So there's always this connection of finding our music, finding our opportunities. If there's a remix of a song, Tempted to Touch and those kind of other songs, what's her name, Saucy Wow song, work. In the later years, we recognize there's possibilities, and we're seeing these small avenues to cross over and thinking, okay, there is something here. But you're right, being abroad, living in a space that is not necessarily a Caribbean space, you have this yearning, this kind of nostalgia, and I have this continuous nostalgia, and I advise anybody, go abroad, sure.
Yeah.
Learn what exists abroad, go to museums, go to concerts, go and see things. But don't forget home. Don't turn your back and forget what happened here and where your root is. I don't want to get too philosophical, but that is something that I think is a part and parcel of our growth as a people and as a nation. Because I think right now, Trinidad and Tobago, I call it a diaspora nation. We are now have an active diaspora that recognizes us, that acknowledges us, that engages with us, comes back and forth, and promotes us and creates and has us as part of their creative base. And that is something that I think is promising going forward.
And perhaps should be monetized and used better for our benefit.
Definitely. The monetization part, it's slow to come, but it's coming there. I mean, we have these workarounds, and our financial system we're not Singapore, where we have access to US dollars and that kind of stuff. So we do have some problems. We have workarounds and that kind of stuff. But the ability to monetize your work, I think if you're in the music business, it's about making money and making a profit. Yes, there's art and that kind of stuff. And you could have a philosophical idea that my music is art and it's not commercial. I understand and accept that. But if you're in a space that is a commercial space and the commercial space asks for something and is willing to pay, don't deny it. How we get paid if we are based in Trinidad, as I said, we have systems that are possibly out of our control in terms of those financial gratuities. But there are openings, there are ways around it, and there are experts who can advise, creatives to, get a website. That's the first thing I always tell every artist. Have a website, have a website, have a website. A lot of them don't listen to me. But that is a gateway to you, as opposed to waiting for Mr. Zuckerberg or Mr. Elon Musk and their platforms to
acknowledge and certify you.
Exactly.
Give you the blue tick.
There you go. You know it.
But that's a good segue into the conversation that perhaps maybe you've been looking at now. how are modern artists from Trinidad and Tobago earning on the platforms? Because we're being told that they are earning.
Some are earning. I think, as I said, we talk about workarounds. I know that a few of them they go through aggregators. So ideally, the aggregators make a lot more money, right, than they do. But there is a position where they can have access to outside of the diaspora circle. A person in Idaho may say, I want to hear this thing called soca. There is a space, the music is identified, and they have access to the music. Monetization, as I said, becomes slightly a problem. There are workarounds. Some people have go through aggregators or distributors and have a US account and that kind of stuff. So the money goes there. We do have the ability to monetize YouTube locally. It's possible, but it's not a direct, easy way to do it. In terms of Spotify and Apple Music, they have distributors, managers, let's call it clearing houses that are abroad that allow them to collect their money and possibly have their money abroad. I hope that they pay their taxes both here and everywhere. So I don't want to put anybody in trouble. I'm not going to call names, but it is something that is growing. Everybody recognizes that having your music and discovering your music on streaming platforms is essential, because the real money that is made in the music industry, certainly for our artists, is performing live. Right. And performance comes about with music. I mean, radio was the dominant distributor of music for many years. Streaming has its space. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have a couple of streaming services that are free. Right? Apple Music, you still have to pay for it, but Spotify is free, certainly on your laptop. And YouTube is the number one streaming platform on planet Earth. So there's this ability to hear music as well as radio stations such as this one. But these are all calling cards towards a grander vision, which is to perform live. So our artists, I think, as any artist is coming up now, the thing that you have to learn in addition to be able to make a good record is how to perform live, because that is the thing that's going to have a lasting memory on your career.
And a lot of the events that you have been helping to produce provide that platform for new artists or established artists. What have you seen as the benefit of that kind of exposure?
Well, we can only do so much. Giving them the exposure is part and parcel of what jazz artists on the Greens do. We acknowledge the legacy artists, as we call them, and there's some artists who have developed a following that is important, and it's continuous almost. We have a loyal and dedicated audience that has supported us, but we also try to introduce brand new artists. We have a new feature started a couple of years ago, in 2019, just before COVID, where we had a second stage. And it was called the Songbirds Live Stage. And on that stage, we allowed these younger artists to come on perform. And we had a kind of informal connection with Music TT when it was still Music TT. So that effectively all the artists who have ever appeared on that second stage were actually Music TT alumni from the Spotlight program. Female singers. It's always women love to hear singers, and women love to hear women singers. So, and it's a matter of discoverability. As I said, people know me because I literally am in all these spaces. Then they see this face listening to music without saying a word, going to clubs and that kind of stuff.
The quiet guy in the corner of the room.
Yeah, but I'm listening to the music because I'm thinking that this continuous yearning and this continuous wish that I have since I was a teenager, that we have things here that can be global, right? We produce global writers. That's a new trend that started with Naipaul, but more recently, these ladies are writing these fabulous books that are getting picked up by major publishing houses abroad and selling, I shouldn't say that. And I think there's possibilities still within that for the music. And we have to remake ourselves.
Yes.
A person starting at 60 may be brilliant and great, but reality is a person starting at 20 is going to have a longer future ahead of them. And that's where we want to have our music going forward, as it is.
Yeah, and so you have those artists given an opportunity at the events to perform, but you're also being exposed to them through your reviews in a way that perhaps not many people are. How would you suggest somebody goes about finding the music that you have access to?
Well, because it's an in-flight mag, I've done it at the magazine, Caribbean Airlines magazine, as well as I wrote for both Guardian and Newsday, right? And reviewing live performances as well as reviewing the records and getting access to the music. I also have the blog, my blog.iradio.tt, shameless plug. And
not shameless, hold on, slow it down and tell people again so they know how to find it.
Blog.iradio.tt.
Right.
Thank you for
Lovely.
allowing me to market that.
Of course.
Right. And on my review, because I recap the reviews there, because they have
Mm-hmm.
first publishing rights at the magazine, but I could also recap it later. And of course, I put links, either the videos or a Spotify link if they have an album, so that people can actually hear the music, right? It'd be nice if Caribbean Airlines allows that. I know they have an app to allow
Yes.
for entertainment online. But if they could get the music and put it on the app, that'd be perfect, right? But that's another conversation. But access to music, it's not impossible. Discoverability is something that you have to actively work at. I could sit down here today and tell you about a number of artists. Those people who listen to my conversation will then have it to go wherever they'd have to go and look for
Yes.
it, right? So
Yes.
I putting it out in the public domain and getting the names out there and doing my reviews and telling people I think this is a good record to listen to purchase. That's only step one. The other part is now the active listener has to, decide yay or nay based on words on a piece of paper.
Yes, and actually Googling, I find that people are, we have that so much at our fingertips, but we're not even willing to Google. We're
Really?
spending
I always thought that everybody Google everything. If you would
I would
come up
think
with a brand
so.
new word, they Google it just to see what. Oh, if you say so, okay. I was unaware.
I find that it's becoming that they want it to be handed to them or told directly instead of doing the little search. And I am
There is that.
always searching new music and trying to find new stuff and listening out for
Yeah.
when new music is coming out.
As you say that, if you don't remember, just sticking this last piece in here, talking about new music. Every it's the magazine comes out bi-monthly, and every end, like a week before the deadline, I'm still searching because only 4 records I'm reviewing, right? And people will send music to me, and some of the music just doesn't cut it for me.
Right.
And it's kind of generic kind of stuff. I'm looking at something a little different, and I'll go online. And famously, CD Baby was a label actually that had, now the new thing is Bandcamp, and it's an independent for independent artists. And I'll go there, plug in the word Trinidad and Tobago, plug in the word Caribbean, and some names will pop up.
Yeah.
And then I'll listen to the things online and stream it and say, this is interesting, and contact the people, get a little background information, and then boom, a review. I can knock off a review in a day. But if I could get
if you're
access,
finding the underground, finding
yeah.
the outliers, perhaps.
That's a better word, outliers. I like that word.
Yeah.
I love this interview. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, of course.
Dropping beautiful words here for me. Go ahead.
How do live music events contribute overall to the landscape of our culture?
Well, certainly for our music here, I mean, let's not fool ourselves. Our number one music genre is soca music, right? And the second most popular music, I think, is gospel music. I think they have 3 radio stations and a very large audience. And just literally yesterday, I went to a gospel concert. And there's a dedicated audience that goes to these musics and things. But the live performance, I think, is very, very critical, right? There was a conversation online just recently about the idea of artists singing over tracks, as it was, right? So you're hearing the voice and you're hearing background vocals and all kind of instruments, and you're not hearing the artist kind of stuff. Those are the things that I always advise artists, that you have to learn to perform live, right? Because as you said, the live performance and the festivals and the concerts, they generate a lot of the business of music in Trinidad and Tobago. For years, of course, we had, the March Grand Calypso tents dominating what Carnival was in terms of music performances. And now the idea of a fete becomes the kind of norm in terms of what brings people to Trinidad and Tobago. But within those fetes, we do have artists performing, and those artists have to deliver, right? Some artists get away with it. You just have a hot tune, you just sing the hook, and the audience will have fun.
Have a time with you, but performing becomes
But I think
important.
performing becomes critical. And it's more so with instrumentalists. Of course, in my genre, the jazz artists and the greens, we have a number of instrumentalists who just play instrumental music. So that it's critical that you have to practice, right? Singers, practice. Because I think humans have this ability, I've always said this, we have this kind of objective ability to know good from bad. And we know, and just objective, we have the kind of subjective good, better, best. But I think we do know right off the bat, this is good, this ain't good.
And it's beyond, sometimes it starts with personal taste, but it also expands to, I can tell when something is pleasing to the ear.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. We know discordant songs, we know off key, we know all those kind of things. But then there's some things that, of course, there's this emotional thing, my blood I taking it kind of stuff, right? So that you have, as an artist, you have a responsibility, I think, to be the best you can be, right? Not just not just to pass by, not just to get by as it was. So it is in your best interest as an artist to be able to perform and perform well. How difficult or how easy that is, especially when people have other jobs, to practice 8 hours a day. That may be a very difficult thing to do, but that has become the kind of norm and standard, certainly for a lot of international artists. So that after a point in time where you may be performing as a professional for 15 years, and they put them on a stage side by side, and you recognize there's a difference. So that you have the idea of performing and performing well becomes critical, because live performance still, I think, is certainly the number one revenue generator for music artists. And I think it's still a thing that audiences recognize that, okay, if I'm going to hear a musician, I want to see them live. And I don't want to just I don't want karaoke necessarily. But,
no, I don't want to play back.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, you're listening to Power Conversations here on Power 102. I'm speaking with Nigel Campbell. He's a music businessman and producer and event coordinator, as well as a reviewer for publications like the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian, the Newsday, as well as the Caribbean Beat magazine. I was recently in flight and saw the 4 variations that are currently in the magazine, or the 4 varieties of music that you were reviewing. Okay. And I was watching the kind of exposure that you put yourself through. And I know that's on purpose. Can you tell me a little bit about that desire to know so much range of our music coming out of Trinidad and Tobago or the Caribbean?
Well, this may actually be linked back to my university years. As I said, the idea of going abroad and making sure as a Trinidadian, leaving this space and going to the international space, the metropolitan spaces, absorb something from there. 4 years in Toronto back in from 80 to 84, the number one music was Canadian music. It was Russian, Loverboy, and all this kind of music. And I ain't gonna lie, I was not a rockhead. By the time I came back, I understood what Rush meant, and I listened to. I like lyrics, so that I was I was reading the lyrics of Rush and some of these bands. But the idea of also being in those spaces and recognizing that those are international spaces. When I lived in the States, I lived in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has Howard University along the kind of north-south corridor on Georgia Avenue. But on that east-west corridor, there's the Smithsonian institutions and all the museums. And they're free. And I've always advised Caribbean people, go to a museum. Go and see art in the Art Museum. Go to the American History Museum, the Natural. I wasn't there when the African American Museum was built. When I was there as I said, early 2000s. But go and see. And this idea, and back in those days, we also had record stores. So Tower Records existed. So you could go in a record store, and a record store was the size of a living room. It was a huge building, and they had multiple genres and different types of music. And you could spend a day inside of there. I'm the nerd who read the line.
You would spend a day in a record store.
Guess what was happening, right? But that didn't mean I didn't go to the club, but like that whole other topic. But the idea of being curious about what else exists out there, and curious about the idea that there are people around the world who also desire this notion of crossing over. So you'd have fusion with Kawali rhythms and Bhangra, with it fusing with pop and EDM and that kind of stuff. And it's always curious to see what do other people in other parts of the world consider modern music. So this idea of discovering music is something that I'm not going to hear every single piece of music ever created. I possibly can't listen to in one stretch all the music that is dropping between now and Carnival, right? It's a lot of music, right? But the idea of listening is something that is part and parcel of me. I mean, I'm in one room here that has books. My main library is in another room, but books are things that I cherish. So reading becomes part and parcel of my life. And music, well, I had a big record collection, but everything is now digitized. But the idea of listening to music and discovering it, I think is something that, as Caribbean people, we have to pride ourselves in our ability. And certainly in Trinidad and Tobago, where the world has come to us, everybody from everywhere, it's part of the world, has come to Trinidad and Tobago and, stopped here for a little while. As I said, made a child and left or whatever the deal was. But there's this
Trinidad
Trinidad
this
is
multicultural place that
exactly.
exists. That
so
is
Trinidad
very
is
hard to find anywhere else. It's a multicosm of so many cultures. I find that in other parts of the region, you would not hear Indian heritage music, really. A lot of places in the region. So I find that if I'm out of Trinidad, when I come back and hear a little Hindi on the radio,
Yeah.
I am immediately connecting with the multicultural nature of our space.
Yeah, yeah. And as I said, I think it's important for us to be part and parcel of the world. I'm not going to suggest that you drop your favorite music and just become dedicated to everything, because humans are humans. We like to dance. We like our pop music, whatever that pop is. But I think it's also important as a people and as a buying public to engage with the world so that we learn a little more, so that we can be positioned anywhere in the world. You could drop us off in Norway and we'll have a space and we'll be well understood and make a space for ourselves.
I've been pointing out to my mom recently just how many African artists are on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And she's, of course, been explaining that when she had access, and in terms of how the way the world was made up, Fela Kuti was the only one she may have been able to listen to.
Fela
And
Kuti and
now we
OCB.
have, now we
Mm-hmm.
have at least 10 African native artists on the Billboard charts being
Mm-hmm.
played in heavy rotation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that kind of exposure ever being possible for Trinidad and Tobago music?
Well, this is where the idea of volume comes into play, right? As
Mm-hmm.
I said, over the years, you kind of look at where our music has gone and what has been quote unquote very popular. And there are two records I always like to point out, certainly from the American perspective with the
Mm-hmm.
Billboard charts. That is Turn Me On by Kevin Little and Tempted to Touch by
Two
Repeat.
non-Trinis, how dare you?
No, hold on. Don't kill me. Don't kill me. As I said, it's only on Billboard, right? There have
Right,
been other
okay.
artists, right? There have been
Right,
other artists
yes.
who've crossed over as it was, right? And there have been attempts at finding a fit. I mean, one of the ideas of soca in its origins was the idea of crossing over, right? It was initially the soul of Calypso, but there was also this idea of crossing over. So the idea of us making it meant that we had to develop something that was popular, and then we have to have a volume of people either buying it or listening to it. Now back in the days it was buying it, now it's listening to it, kind of stuff. And that volume is indicative. As I said, our diaspora is important, but our diaspora is only X amount of people.
Thanks so much. Mm-hmm.
Right? In the whole islands of the Caribbean, including Bermuda, all the way up to Turks and Caicos, up to Bermuda and the Guyanas and Belize and that kind of stuff, there are about 45 or 46 million people speaking multiple languages, right? Only about 7 million of them speak English,
Yes.
right? So you see what we're operating with. There are
Mm-hmm.
more than 7 million people in Manhattan,
Yes.
in New York alone, right?
Yeah, in one state.
In one city, effectively.
Yeah.
So what we're dealing with is a volume situation. In the continent of Africa, there are 1 billion people. So artists out of Nigeria who are making Afrobeats now, although they're Nigerians and Nigerians first, the continent of Africa listens to their music.
Yes.
And also Latin speakers, the reggaeton phenomenon as it was, something I did not know. More than 80% of Spanish speakers in the planet live in the Americas, South, Central, and North America, right? So 80%. So you sing a song in Spanish, and it has a nice rhythm, it has a nice beat. You have fans, whether in Argentina, Colombia, or going all the way up to South LA, or East LA, or wherever it is. So we have a kind of play that we don't have necessarily that the Africans do have, that I've also said that the Puerto Ricans and the Dominicans had, in terms of getting numbers immediately. If you just said, okay, I'm going to listen to Caribbean people who speak English, we may be limiting ourselves.
Yes.
Do I sing a Spanish version? Do I sing a French version? Do I sing a Dutch version, Papiamento, whatever? These are decisions that business people may have to make. But it becomes a matter of volume. And that's the one thing that is not on our side. The breakthrough of Kevin Little to get to number 4 on the American charts, I still am amazed at it. Because I remember when the song came out in Trinidad, it was a song. It was all right. Yeah. They remixed it. They put Sprague Benz on it, and it slowly went up the charts. And I've seen it going up. And once you get into the top 5 in the United States charts, that is major.
Yes.
Right. A lot of people now consider Kevin Little a one-hit wonder, but he's living on that. Yes. One hit in America. And I'm talking about a hit, not a popular song, but a hit. I remember Barry White and one of these people said this thing: if you have one hit, you can live good for the rest of your life. So that is it. So I think I'm not suggesting that we are looking for one-hit wonders. Although an American man told me that he only thought the Caribbean produced one-hit wonders, and including Shaggy into that, which I had to.
Wow, that's so disrespectful.
I had to tell him some words, right? I had to tell him some words, right? But he told me that Shaggy had one hit. Right, it wasn't me. All the other songs were popular, and he defined what a hit was. Right, so we are operating in a space of about 1.5 million people. Right, The United States has 300 million people. Let's say I assume half of them are buying public. But then they also have a machine that makes their
Yes.
music goes to the
That
whole of Europe,
promotes
the
and
whole
yeah.
of Asia, the whole of Middle East and North Africa. So these machines, this concept of a multinational corporation works to their benefit. With volume. We're starting small. I think niche is where we have to be. Consider what Calypso Rose did in France, which is a
Yes.
niche market.
Yes.
Singing Calypso, that is, we may think of it as slightly watered down. I'm not sure how other people think about it. But she sold 100,000 records in France. That's a phenomenal amount of
And that's
sales.
recently. That's within the last 5 years or so. For
Correct,
those of our listeners who may not be aware, that's Calypso Rose having a hit album in France. And we say in hit instead of popular. Which word should we use?
Well, again, the concept of hit in America is different from a hit in France, right?
Okay.
You have to sell 1 million records to get a platinum in America. You could sell 100,000 in France and get a platinum.
Hit, right?
Yeah, it's a hit. Yeah, so
yeah,
it's all relative.
Rose has a hit in France, which is
and
nice.
It's an album. Yeah, that's very true.
That's interesting. Are these some of the issues and more, of course, that you address on the podcast, Music Matters, the Caribbean edition? Share some of that with our listeners.
Shameless plug. Thank you very much. Podcast.
It's not shameless.
Yeah.
It's important.
It's important.
We're having the conversation because we want people to know what you have.
Yeah. Right. And I'm going to sell myself. As myself and Laura Dorich Phillip, who's actually at present, she got a job in Turks and Caicos, experienced Turks and Caicos. So we've kind of had the podcast on a slight hiatus, I would suggest. Although she's coming back for Christmas, so we're going to drop a whole set of new issues, right? Because a lot of conversation, a lot of topics to derive. But we've been able to have conversations with, of course, soca artists, a lot of them. But the idea, and it was Laura's idea, that we speak about Caribbean music and the Caribbean music industry, and we have to speak to players and movers and shakers, business people, promoters, managers. And a more recent vintage, we've been able to contact Caribbean people who work abroad. So we spoke to people in the United States who work for major labels. We spoke to Shawnee B at BBC One Extra and some other people. Yeah, there you go. Right?
Shawnee B. Because he loves us.
Definitely.
That's why I love him, because he shows his love for the Caribbean and puts us on display in a respectful, kind of shine your light kind of way.
Yeah. He's done a lot. It's no two ways about it. He's the number one promoter of soca music in England. But I think critically, I remember we spoke to him about, well, how do we get our music there? Because they still have, programmers and who gets the music on and that kind of stuff. There are a lot of things. There was this other Professor Mike Allen from Barbados. He's now retired in Barbados, Professor Emeritus in the business of music. And he deals with modern music. And he's done articles. He wrote the Encyclopedia of Reggae. He's done articles on Rihanna and Bob Marley and how the American market has quote unquote sanitized some reggae music to sell it. But Bob Marley has a platinum album with Legend, platinum US, which is Diamond. Sorry, I apologize. Diamond, which is 10 million copies have been sold. The idea of how we have to kind of almost reconfigure ourselves to sell to international markets is something that has been ongoing. And our conversations on Music Matters, the Caribbean edition, focus on the idea of the business of music, because we're more than just talking about how to make the music, but how do you sell your music? What do you do to sell your music? Let's have a conversation on that, because there may be ways that we can connect with audiences who can, subliminally do things that work for us in terms of streaming our music, discovering the music and making sure that it's constantly streamed, purchasing the music, because sales still exist. People still buy things that are called CDs and vinyl and that kind of stuff, right?
I had to explain to somebody that vinyl is back. They didn't believe me.
Vinyl is back, yeah. There's another little stick point here. There's this strange phenomenon. We're talking about vinyl is back. And an article suggested that a lot of people are buying vinyl. These young people, like Taylor Swift and all these kind of artists, are putting on vinyl and selling literally 1 million copies of vinyl. But the people who are buying vinyl don't necessarily own record players, but they want to have a tangible artifact of the artist. So they'll buy it and they'll put it and say, I have a Taylor Swift record.
And because it also is coming with specials. It's coming with the poster. It's coming with the lyric book. We're back to actually publishing a lyrics book with the album.
Yes. So that it becomes merchandise in a sense. And this is part and parcel of the revenue stream of artists that they have to understand. we have laws in our country, copyright laws and that kind of stuff. We have trademark and that kind of stuff. Our artists, fortunately, unfortunately, not everyone is up to mark on all the ways that they can maximize their revenues and that kind of stuff.
I think it
It's an
sometimes
ongoing
feels like an
educational thing.
accident. Yeah, it sometimes may feel like an accident that you have a song that gains popularity, not necessarily a marketing strategy. So I guess that's part of what your podcast may be addressing.
Yes, it is. But we've also tried to let people know, and artists who listen to our music, we always constantly say, get a website, but also understand the business, because a lot of people say, well, that's the business side. Let somebody deal with that, right? Yeah, I understand that, because it could be technical and may not want to be 100% behind that. I'm more into singing. But understand what you own and make sure that you own what you
What you
produce.
own, yeah.
Own what you own. Correct. That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure you own what you own. And so that you could trademark your name as it was. You could manufacture merchandise and that kind of stuff. Copyright your lyrics, obviously, and certainly copyright it in the United States, which is a process. And in Trinidad, the work becomes it's your copyright once you produce it.
Yes.
But in the United States, you have to register it, and that actually additional process, I think, is a necessary thing for our artists. Certainly, if they're looking at the North American market for their business.
Guys, you're listening to Power Conversations here on Power 102. I'm speaking with Nigel Campbell, and it's just about 20 minutes before the hour of 9 o'clock. We are speaking the business of music, as well as Nigel's projects like his podcast, which is called Music Matters, the Caribbean edition, along with Laura Dowidge Phillips, who is known across the region for her reviews of music and interest in culture.
Yes. Just got a prize yesterday in Miami for being a Caribbean leader. Yes,
oh, lovely. That's so nice. What has been an impactful story that you've done uncovered on the podcast? Maybe perhaps one that sticks out most in your mind.
Well, there was, as I said, the one with Mike Allen, was a key one for me, because I had sought him out, right? Mm-hmm. I'd noted his articles. He writes, scholarly articles about the music business, but there's always focus on Caribbean people. Of course, being a Bajan, Rihanna is one of his things. And certainly I'd done a number of work on Bob Marley, as well as artists like Prince and Jimi Hendrix and that kind of stuff. So we had a conversation, and you talk about one nerd talking to
another
nerd, right? Yeah. And that particular interview, it was just Laura wasn't present, so it was just Mike and I going back and forth, and we talked back and forth for an hour. And like when we were finished, we were grinning from ear to ear, because two nerds talking was a lot of fun. But he was able to impress upon me the idea of how international music markets, view the Caribbean. And it's why one of those things that comes back to me, why I talk about, we've seen the press reports of people talking about the Caribbean, right? Certainly the press reports about people talking about Haiti, people talking about Cuba. There's two large islands. You can't deny, Hispaniola, and they can't deny their presence, right? Yeah. But everything else becomes, just a tourist paradise kind of thing. So there's this impression of the Caribbean as just being a space, to quote Derek Walcott, a place to flee seriousness, right? And I've been one of those persons, as I said, just those two episodes, those two sojourns in my life, early in my life, when I was abroad, recognizing that I'm a Caribbean person. I'm in a town that had a Howard University, and a Smithsonian Institute. I'm in Toronto, and I was at the University of Toronto itself. And Caribbean people are there, and certainly a lot of people, certainly by the 1970s and 80s, we had our first brain drain, in a sense. A lot of them were migrating, and a lot of them who migrated then never looked back, unfortunately. But the idea of a Caribbean presence and how the Caribbean can make us stand up and be recognized. We have very few people. Of course, Bob Marley is iconic, and he basically represents reggae, represents Jamaica. The very fast runners out of Jamaica, Shelly Ann and Usain and Asafa and these fellas, right? In the world of cricket, of course, here in Trinidad, Dwayne Bravo, of course, Brian Lara, you can't forget Brian Lara. Their focus is on India. So that's another stick point.
Popularity point. Yeah.
Exactly. I had done a kind of chart just utilizing YouTube views on terms of artist plays. And the number one Trinidad song, I mentioned the other two songs by the Bajan and the Vincentian. But the number one Trinidad song, soca song, let me just refine it, was Kess's Hello, right? And I said, wow, Kess's Hello. But the number one song on YouTube by Trinidadian is Dwayne Bravo's Champion. right? and
Tranquil to the world.
and the majority of his market is in India,
Yes,
right?
of course. And that's again what we mentioned earlier, a numbers game.
It's a
That's
numbers game.
primarily a numbers
Yeah.
game. And I
And
believe that it's
mhm.
off of that Indian market that he was able to build a studio.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah,
There's no two ways about it.
yeah,
And it's good part that Chris Gayle also has hits out there. I reviewed a Chris Gayle single. Chris Gayle and a top Indian rapper added a record together. And it's not a bad song, right? This is the
yeah,
beauty
yeah.
of it. But the idea that the
But
continent, well,
that
the
is
subcontinent
relative.
of India with 1.3 million people, and
Yes,
there are links that are here. Our
yeah,
artists, whether they're chutney singers or singer zest or whatever it is,
yeah,
India is there, and a large proportion of those in that Indian market, larger than the population of the United States of America, they understand English and they
yeah,
look to Western ways, right? So there's not like they're devoted to one specific culture. They're broader than that. And we as Trinidadians, and I keep repeating this all over, Trinidadians and Tobagonians, we have to see wider. We have to see the wider world. Trinidad is literally in a physical space on the planet where we're the kind of gateway between North and South America. We should ideally know how to speak Spanish, but we're also a pivot point because of who came here between the continent of Africa and the subcontinent of India, and
yeah.
increasingly so now, China.
China.
Right.
Yeah. We've been kind of sprinkling across our conversation some of the modern music or perhaps how it's being exposed. And I wonder if you've seen the rise of Lady Lava.
Oh, well, she's a phenomenon right now. And I'm not going to, you can't deny that, right? I mean,
Yeah,
what
and I
surprised?
think it's so specific that her
Mhm,
song became available on like TikTok and Instagram to
mhm,
be used as a background.
mhm.
And then Cardi B picked up.
That Cardi B forward.
Cardi B effect.
Yeah, there's no denying.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't remember. Well, some people, I should say, not everybody. Aaron Duncan, who was at one point was a little kid singing
Yes.
calypso music,
Yes.
is he came up and produced that rhythm, right? And he
Yes.
did a song with Zoe. Um,
Travel with Zoe,
uh,
Instagram or social media phenomenon who's been living across the Caribbean for a few months,
Months,
years, for
yeah, something
context
like that.
for our listeners.
Yeah,
But
so
she has now started doing music. Let's call it that.
yeah. So she had a song called Single that Aaron and her
Right.
did a song called
Mhm.
Single. Right. But when Lady Lava came out her song, the idea of bend over, the ring on your finger, and it spoke directly, certainly to a market, right? A female audience as it was, right? And to men, telling them, hey, this is what it is, right? But I think certainly that Cardi B forward was critical, right? And once again, the volume notion. Cardi B's following on social media is like in the tens of millions,
Millions.
right?
Mm-hmm.
As I said, I've been doing a lot of analysis on my own. Once again, nerd Nigel, so that I can have some kind of data-driven conversation in terms of our artists having like listeners per month. That's this thing that Spotify has. Kevin Little, famously termed, he has 1 million listeners per month. There's nobody else with 1 million listeners per month who's singing soca. Nobody else, right?
And is that, and are they listening to one song? Usually, I guess it would
Well,
just be that song that making up the majority of that million.
Exactly, but 1 million, those numbers are kind of threshold numbers that are so important, right? And they're very high numbers, so that a lot of artists don't even get 10 million. Once you get 10 million views on YouTube, we might take notice of you. If you're only doing 500,000 and less than 1 million, you're forgotten, you're lost in the kind of grander scheme of things. So you have to have other ways of making connections. The famous like who you know and who know you kind of stuff to get some traction. As I said, Cardi B is dealing with tens of millions of followers on all her platforms and that kind of stuff. If she says something, she's so big that a candidate user as
even if
one of her speakers,
25% of her audience decides to Google what she spoke about, you have 10 million right there, possibly.
Cardi B could talk about politics and people take it up. Major news stories say Cardi B said X, Y, and Z. So she's just one of those persons that you really want as a friend in your back pocket. And for her to big up Lady Lava, I think that's so important. And
yes,
it
they
really
performed
boosted it.
together on stage a couple of weeks ago. I mean, it's gotten that big. Cardi B was there ranking her up. And I think we speak a lot about numbers and that entryway into a larger market. And I think that's so important for our musicians to understand. As we veer back into jazz or the fusion music coming out of the Caribbean or Trinidad and Tobago in specific. Where do you see that going?
Oh, it's a long hard road because some of
Right.
those, well, the genres outside of the popular genres, we know reggae, we know reggaeton, and soca. We talk about multiples of 10. If soca is a million, reggae may be 10 to 100 million. And the reggaeton is a billion. I talk about views. That is the kind of average views, right? So we talk about scales. We talk about scales. Jazz, much less. The output of jazz also certainly at one point, about 10, 15 years ago, local artists and Caribbean artists were releasing records, right, of original music and new music. That has almost stopped. It has been replaced by live performance, admittedly. So we have performers who go out there. Some people have made themselves brands. I'm going to call Vonnet Bigfoot, Creole Chantus, Ilan Parley, and some others. They become brands, right? And they're known, but they're not doing multiple shows. Vonnet is in demand all over the place, right? And we have these connections: St. Lucia Jazz and Arts Festival, Dominica Creole Jazz, and the other jazz, St. Kitts Music Festival. The idea of our music spreading out is important, but the numbers are kind of small. So it becomes almost niche. I use that word once again about niche because I think that has become critical in how we operate in our music. I gave the example of Calypso Rose, right? If we operate at niche, and niche kind of signifies there's also a kind of added value to the product as opposed to just being not selling a lot. I always give the example.
And that niche may be rooted in cultural representation.
Yeah. And I think this is just my opinion. I think that we should be ideally looking at niche as opposed to mass market because it's going to be very difficult, very expensive. And I think you had suggested you had to be kind of lucky to get boosted almost kind of stuff, right? If somebody hears you, if a Cardi B hears you and next thing you know, Lady Lava is on a chart and she's moving up, something could happen in the sense that an American industry person may remix a song, may want to reproduce a song, may want to create some added value for the American business
market,
to market it up, to move it up. So we have to be flexible. We can't be too rigid, but niche, I think, is where a lot of our music can possibly make it in specific markets. And you can charge a high value for that kind of thing. I mean, jazz musicians, a concert by a jazz musician, even a starting one, has a higher ticket price, certainly in North American market, than a pop singer singing in a club. And they're both kind of starting independent artists. There's a kind of value added that certain niche markets have. And I think, ideally, that's where we should be looking at.
And is it possible that perhaps a younger audience for jazz can help revive our local industry? Because, I mean, Samara Joy, very young, and recently walking under 25 and recently winning Grammys. Is her influence on the international market perhaps going to trickle down to our space?
Samara is unique. She's also brilliant. She performed in St. Lucia in 2020 for the St. Lucia Jazz Festival, and Vonnet Bigfoot actually performed with her. I remember asking Vonnet to say, I hope you made a connection, that kind of stuff. They spoke on that kind of stuff. I'm not sure how much of the nature of their conversation. But what we've been doing, certainly as jazz artists in the Greens, have been over the years recognizing that our initial audience, because 2025, April the 5th, shameless plug, is our 20th anniversary of Jazz Artists and the Greens. We have been that audience that came to Jazz Artists and Greens #1 is 20 years older. And the kind of average age of, when I say the word jazz, everybody automatically thinks, oh, that's old people music. So it starts at about 40 and up. So people are getting older. However, we've recognized that there are musicians who are younger, who have the potential of, bringing their colleagues and their cohort, as it was, to come and listen to the music. Younger people, it's a kind, almost like a thing that you have to listen to music. It's like reading a book. If the book is long, attention span has dropped over the years, I guess, based on social media, that people can't read an article of 2,500 words. So articles are not 800 words or less kind of stuff. So we have this idea of younger people. Let's quote it. Let's say we jazzified a pop tune or a soca tune. They say, oh, that's nice. But we still want to dance. So audiences are mixed in terms of how they react. Younger audiences have to be willing to get outside of themselves and say, let me try something.
Expand their repertoire a little bit.
Yeah, almost. Yeah. But it's the work that promoters have to continually do. It's the work that artists have to do to challenge themselves. So let me see what I can do to build a younger audience so that I can have a career that lasts 40 years.
And I think I also want to like do a call to action, like folks, parents, adults, or
Mm,
folks who are attending the Jazz on the Greens events and other regional festivals,
mm,
expose your nieces and nephews to the music. I think
mm,
I was exposed because I was always around my grandmother. So she would have records on, and her friends would put on music to
mm,
just be in each other's company. They're
mm.
playing cards, they have cooking food, but music is on in the background, and music that they grew up with.
One of the things that we have to acknowledge that young people have done is they've created genres, right? As you
Hmm.
talk about listening to music and that kind of stuff, I recently wrote an article about some two young ladies out in LA, and the kind of preface of that article is the idea that diaspora people created genres, and I talk about the kind of invention of hip hop as it was. So
Hmm.
Jamaican guy, DJ Cool Herc, that's
Yes.
the narrative.
Hmm.
DJ Cool Herc started it. But yeah, he listened to the music of his parents, James Brown and that kind of stuff. And then he did his little mixing, and of course, Grandmaster Flash was a Bajan and that kind of stuff. But the idea that certainly in the United Kingdom, where there is a large Caribbean population, a second generation, parents born in Caribbean, children born in England. And of course, growing up in England, they hear their parents' music, calypso, soca, reggae, ska, whatever the deal is. And they, in a sense, either utilize that to invent something brand new, grime, drill, garage,
Yes. Hmm.
or they like there's a new renaissance of jazz in England, UK jazz, Nubia Garcia, Theon Cross, Shabaka Cummins, Bajan also.
Yes.
Theon, Nubia Garcia, Trinidad father, Guyanese mother. I hope that's the order. Theon Cross, St. Lucian parents. And the idea that Caribbean people, Caribbean households and young people are able to utilize those sources and then develop upon them is not something I'm going to discount. So that if
Yes.
a younger generation is hearing the original rap soul music of Brother Resistance and what's it, and Sherrod Byron, and oh god, the name is escaping me now. I can't believe this guy, the original man, Lancelot Lane,
Hmm.
right? If those were the original music they heard and they came up with something else, right? There's this new thing called Zest, but I think Zest has a straight line back to the origins of rap soul,
Yes.
right? So that the idea of evolving music is something that young people do. And I'm not against that, right? But I'm also hoping that they get involved in that work of trying to evolve music as an audience, as a buying public, as a creative group of people.
And I guess that's another call to action for everyone. I mean, don't be
Mhm.
afraid of using the influence of what you have around you,
Correct.
to build on it. And
Mhm.
I think a lot of our artists in the Caribbean have done that.
Mhm.
Red Boys has produced a calypso rhythm this year. I don't
Yeah,
know if
well,
you've heard it. You heard it, yes. The children, is
Calypso
it?
is back. Calypso is back. I mean,
Who
let's,
brought it back?
yeah.
I was having this conversation yesterday. Who brought it back?
Well, I don't want to say the children rhythm, but the idea of
No,
somebody had
even
suggested
before that, yeah.
the idea that Marshall sang at
Yes,
Calypso Monarch
Calypso
last
Monarch
year
is the true shake
and
up.
sing, yeah, and he's back. Somebody else, I don't know how true it's going to be, but they say about 3 or 4 artists are saying they're going to write a Calypso and enter the competition because
Yes.
the Trinidad music market competitions become a revenue source for a number of artists, and as well as a space where we can have large audiences coming to see you and that kind of stuff. And of course, making sure that you're good or you're not good kind of thing. They can make or break you. Skinner Park especially. The idea of having Calypso once again as part of the music scene and a younger cohort doing it, I think is
Yeah, because
so important.
we had
So
Marshall, you
important.
had
Mhm.
Tisha, you had
Yeah.
Voice, all of the Calypso
Yeah.
Monarch competition last year.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that is so important. I mean, we could be cynical and suggest, well, they kind of use them, but I don't think they use them. I think they have seen that, okay, soca is so much soca, but there's something about Calypso. And I call Calypso a lyricist and a performer's art. I think lyrics are very important in Calypso, more so than the music or the rhythm as it was. But the idea of a new cohort of singers going back into Calypso and making it danceable.
Yes.
Before Shorty called soca soca in the early 70s and the 60s, we had jump up
Danceable
calypsos,
Calypso.
right? So it's not like you couldn't dance a calypso, right? So the idea of bringing that back, I think, is a kind of nod to nostalgia, but I think it's an important renaissance that can possibly do something for the music and certainly do something for calypso music.
Yeah.
The idea of calypso music as a specified genre. Although,
Just to
because I
share with
argue
our
that
audience some
soca is
context,
more.
that Till Them rhythm, and I think it's called Till Them,
Till then.
it's coming out of Barbados from the Red Boys camp, but featured on it is lyrical from St. Vincent, St. Vincent,
St. Vincent.
young brother from Trinidad,
Trinidad.
and Marshall, our
Marshall, yeah.
reigning Calypso monarch.
Nice song. Nice song. I love Marshall. As I said, the lyrics become critical, and I hope
Yes.
that artists recognize, and even with the influence of, as I said, Tasia, Voice, and Marshall, certainly last year entering, that there's an idea that, okay, there's something else for me to do. Read a book, let me get some lyrics, let me write some lyrics, even if you have to collaborate with other people to write lyrics. But let's start utilizing lyrics. I hold near and dear the idea that words are our magic, our goal in Trinidad and Tobago. Our prose writers, our poetry writers, our lyricists, David Rogers a king, they are our gold.
Our way with words that we are fast losing is really a treasure that we need to grab onto and hold tight. And I think that's what I saw in some of this new music. That's what I'm seeing, the thoughtfulness to use the double meaning. Even in that, it's becoming a little more thoughtful.
Yeah, as I said, if that happens, that renaissance, even to, I mean, soca is soca, and we know what it is. We like it, we jump up with that kind of stuff. But lyrically, it's all, to me, going in one direction, and the direction is not evolving. If you can expand that by utilizing different lyrics, even if the rhythm is modernizing, that to me is yes, there's something about that. And lyrics are universal. Let's go with that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nigel, for having this conversation. It's been a pleasure.
Kimiko.
I really appreciate it. Thank you, Power 102 listeners. You guys have a great day. It's Monday, the 9th of December. Be safe out there. Take care of each other. This has been Power Conversations here on Power 102.
Bye-bye.